There's a saying among Kalashite caravan guards, if the sky goes silent, it's already too late. A retired Kalashite sellsword. Hi everyone, Jimmy, your local game master here, and today we're diving into the vicious, venomous predators that blur the line between beast and dragons, wyverns. They aren't really dragons. Not really. But tell that to the poor fool who just watched their horse get ripped in half mid-gallop. In this video, we'll explore where wyverns come from in D&D's history, how they've evolved across the editions, their role in the Forgotten Realms, and what makes them unique terrors on the tabletop. Let's begin with where they first appeared. Avoiding their first mention in Chainmail, wyverns made their debut in the white box set by Gygax and Arneson in 1974. As we have talked about plenty of times before, I include this mention mostly to get a nod to the source material, as the description usually can leave you wanting. So before we look at the rest of the material, let's explore the first description of the wyvern. These monsters are relatives of dragons, but they are smaller and have but 2 legs. A wyvern hasn't the fearsome breath of a true dragon, but they are equipped with a poisonous sting in their tail and poison enough to use it repeatedly. It is their primary defense. The tail is mobile and can be brought over the back to reach any opponent standing before its head. This gives us an early glimpse at some of the combat maneuvers and lethality of the wyvern, but let's begin our dive from there, the 1977 Monster Manual. Where a dragon had 4 limbs and a set of wings, a wyvern had 2 legs and wings replacing the front limbs, a classic bat-like silhouette. In early editions, wyverns were classified as large flying reptiles with scorpion tails. They often lacked the intelligence, magical abilities, and majesty of the dragonkin, but they made up for it with brute force and killer instinct. The brutality of these predators of the sky was only exemplified by their lethal sting. Characters stung by the tail in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons made a save versus poison or died. Note that a lot of poison works like this similarly in older editions, so it was crazy, but a lot of poison did that. It is still nasty. In the Monster Manual 2 in 1983, the lore began to deepen. Wyverns were shown nesting in craggy peaks, fiercely territorial, often swooping down on prey far larger than themselves. They weren't just wild animals, they were strategic predators. As the lore expanded, we learned that they are often most active during dusk and dawn, and over time the stat blocks became more refined. By 3.5, their poisonous sting had the deadliness to rival some spellcasters, and in 5e the sting can deal a potential 10d6 poison damage on a failed save, more than enough to fell a low-level party member. So we can initially define these creatures by the difference in physicality from creatures like dragons. Wyverns are dark brown to gray with no front limbs, just leathery wings, scaled hind legs, and a devastating 2-foot poisonous stinger that can release a potent poison that can disintegrate veins and arteries as it works towards the heart. Their bodies extend from 20 to 35 feet long, weighing close to 2,000 pounds. Of their length, half of it was tail. They have an elongated head around 4 feet in length, which is filled with long, sharp teeth. Since they are known for low intelligence, they are usually found lacking in language or spellcasting, but their fiery orange or red eyes will ignite fear in your heart. And while they may lack the capability of language, they can produce 2 horrifying sounds, a loud hissing sound of a forged sword plunged in water, or a low guttural growl. And while dragons prefer to hoard wealth and design their lairs for optimum advantage, the wyvern opts to settle in similar areas like tangled forests and cavern complexes will often nest without complexity. They don't give off distinct odor, but their nesting layers can be distinguished by often fresh kills. In some works of D&D and the Forgotten Realms, you'll find efforts to describe these creatures as anything but stupid and aggressive. The 5th edition Monster Manual describes these creatures as having more cunning than ordinary beasts, of which, despite such a compliment, they are also described to seek out their opponents by honing in on their targets, taking the most direct route possible, which can often lead them to being tricked or trapped. The wyvern pushes its advantages it has through its aerial combat prowess. It will often seize any opportunity to take flight and keep the fight in the air. It will often snatch targets with its talons and carry them off to be devoured. Now, one deserved compliment to the wyvern hunting practices, which shows off the limited intelligence, is the wyvern's subtlety in the hunt. It can identify its shadow and travel in manners that will avoid revealing it to creatures below, subsequently following up with a dive as silent as an owl. It will even go as far as favoring choosing to trail prey from downwind. Since wyvern hunting has become more common practices across the Forgotten Realms, wyverns have actually learned to identify shiny metal as a sign of capable fighters and will often target unarmored, non-shiny creatures, so watch out, wizards. The environment of the wyverns have adapted over time, and with this adapting came a couple more locales to note them living in. In most cases, wyverns are found in temperate mountain forest, caverns, and jungles. A couple examples being the jungle of Semirok, Wyvern Tor, or the Forest of Worms. Wyverns are often solitary hunters, but they have been known to gather in small nesting groups, occasionally during mating season or when food sources are rich. And by small nesting groups, I mean the other mate and the child usually. In rare cases, you will see groups of wyverns in the realms, but I would speculate to say much of this activity would be less of a wyvern's natural nature and more likely due to some form of early influence or subjugation. While I'm on the topic of scarcity of involvement with one another, while it isn't uncommon for young wyvern to get into disputes and fight one another, oddly mature wyvern are able to settle disputes without combat. The methods were written in one of Dragon magazines by Spike Jones. It's a rather satirical piece and similar to the Lamia article, which was written to comedic effect. The one involving wyvern would involve the wyvern trying to cause another wyvern to ingest the poison of another in order to assert dominance and claim some form of territory by overwhelming the other with the stench of its poison and stinger. It is a rather silly article referencing how wyverns could try to shove the tail down each other's mouths. You can look it up, it's Dragon Magazine 275. One can presume a level of understanding or connection between the dragon families, as there are mentions of wyverns working for evil dragons, and this is likely from the dragon's force of will, but you could likely extrapolate a level of cognitive process from their ability to choose to listen to other creatures. Expanding on the idea of their choice in listening, it can even be noted that wyverns can be tamed to ride, which means they are impressionable, and they tend to just lean towards the side that involves more food for them to digest. And before I dive into the wyvern's dietary habits, I think I would be remiss not to mention the concepts of the wyvern rider in the Forgotten Realms and just media in general. So I went pretty deep into trying to find accounts of wyvern riders in the lore of the Forgotten Realms, and the number one that stands out was the Zentrum Sky Mages. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the word Zent or Zenthal Keep, it is essentially a black network city of scoundrels and, to some extent, extremists. They often dealt in slave trade, and over the years were known for the worship of the god Cyric, who essentially replaced the dead three, as in he killed Baal with the sword Godsbane and assisted in killing Miracle during the time of troubles, and assumed the portfolios when it ended. That aside, he is a bit of a cynical deity, even sporting a book bound in flesh that drives you mad, so point being, Zenthal Keep is a bad place. And the Sky Mages are known for using all manners of odd creatures, including wyvern, to protect their trade caravans. They created strong bonds with these creatures, but there isn't much mention as to the nature of doing so, and to some extent I like the mystery of not knowing if the wyverns and other mounts were coerced, tortured, or actually just nurtured. The likelihood is they were mistreated and broken to listen, but the obscurity is somewhat fun and perplexing. The grand point I want to make is that wyverns are generally utilized by antagonistic characters. If we look at other media such as Sarah J. Maas's Throne of Glass series with the Iron Teeth Witches having wyvern mounts, as well as Rebecca Yaros's depiction of the wyvern as creatures rode by these particularly evil creatures known as venomous, I definitely included this note for some of my family and friends that read this, but those are definitely references to wyvern as well. But to conclude this concept, a lot of the media I explored was similar in that wyverns were generally controlled by the villainous characters. Of course, for as many representations of evil that we have for wyverns, we do find some outliers throughout Faerun's history. Trill was the name of a wyvern nursed by a ranger named Matthias, who had slew the mother wyvern and chose to spare the young wyvern and nurse it back to health. The two shared a lifelong bond that only ended when they stayed behind to buy time for their adventuring companions that were trying to escape a demon in Sandstorm. Another such example is the Wyvern family of Cormyr. The noble family was blessed with a gift to shape change into wyvern when wielding an heirloom called the Wyvern Spur. This answer does seem like somewhat of an exception of notable good wyvern, though given the fact that they are shape changers and not actually wyvern. So getting back to where we were before this tangent, we know that these lesser dragons do make their likeliness to dragons in one regard, and that is their appetite. Wyverns are carnivorous, of course. They prefer fresh kills, giant goats, horses, or even ogres if they're desperate, and they eat fast, often swallowing large chunks whole. Vultures and other scavengers follow them, feasting on what's left behind usually. Their metabolism is rapid, and their poison glands require a steady diet of protein to maintain potency. While this doesn't necessarily translate to an in-game effect, it should be known a starving wyvern is a desperate one, and that's when they get reckless. An important note as to why their nests can be a mess as well is the wyvern doesn't naturally digest bones and has to regurgitate the bones of the prey they swallowed whole. Due to their lack of intelligence, wyverns don't have a long-standing list of creatures they're actually enemies with. They are rather neutral and a natural force of the realms. When they are hunted, it is often for their poison or for magical spell components. While most of the remainder of the wyvern is either foul to the taste or impossible to cure, which is the case for the hide, it is mentioned in the Ring of Winter that books could be bound in wyvern hide, so maybe a not widely known fact. Even their bones are seen as not useful, striking many similarities to normal avians to aid with their dynamic flying. The only value one might seek when looking at the wyvern is looking at the foul stinger it has, or its only edible meat, which comes in its tail. While not generally hunted for tail meat alone, among the Dalelands or Cormyr, the meat is considered quite a delicacy if prepared properly. One of the wyvern's most iconic features is its venomous stinger, as we have discussed, and there is a difference between poison and venom, and for the sake of the wyvern they do separate this for a while, but I think inevitably it goes to becoming called venom. Unlike a dragon's breath, which can be avoided or resisted, a wyvern's tail strikes fast, and once the poison's in your veins, you're on a countdown. Now, of course, in game mechanics, this can be not necessarily true. It depends on the edition you're playing, kind of, but in this case, it's still bad. As we discussed, the damage from the stinger can be irreparable and character killing. This is, of course, depending on the edition, but in most lore, the venom is often referred to as lethal. The wyvern uses its tail tactically to inject venom, aiming for the rear or weakest target in the group. If they can pick off a straggler or knock out a mount, they'll circle back for the kill. According to the Dragon Magazine 275 Ecology of the Wyvern, the venom isn't just a defense, it's also a reproductive marker. A wyvern's stinger gland produces a pheromone blend, unique to each individual, allowing mates to track each other across miles, as well as being used to assert dominance over one another. So yeah, it can be them flirting as well in a way, even if it's just impaling you. The wyvern isn't really a practical, intelligent monster that processes the concepts of theological practice or understanding like most, so it's hard to say they truly worship a god, but we can derive some clarity as to where the wyvern originates from and build up from there. So in order to understand where the wyvern originates from, we have to make a couple assumptions on lore that is only strongly implied, so we can make some of these conclusions by, of course, making these assumptions. It was believed wyvern were either descendants of or created by one of the creator races of Faerun known as the Aari. These creator races are vaguely conceptually an avian creature. It was believed that one of the Aari's major cultures, the Aari Kruka, were attacked by a large number of Lamassu, which sparked an effort by the Aari to experiment on an ancient domesticated draconic creature called a landworm, which is said to be the beginning of where the wyverns came from, as some form of experiment on these landworms. This is a little implied and could also assume some form of cross-experimentation between the two could have taken place. And to clarify, the landworms were basically just dragons without wings. And so that's a lot of the connection that people draw from dragons and wyverns. Now, there is some mention that the wyvern could have actually just been an evolution of the Aari, and that they existed after the point that the Aari did, but it's also, that's part of the area where things can get a little bit of a toss-up. So now if we switch directions and go to wyverns' interactions with gods, we can draw a couple names. The first would be Eshoto, a now dead god and former shadowy aspect of Ubtao, who stood against everything the creator Cholton god stood for. The deity was known for being vicious and cowardly. While the wyvern didn't worship the deity, they were seen as a good omen by the followers of Eshoto. This would likely be related to the fact that wyvern often picked off stragglers and weaker creatures of a battlefield, which could be symbolic to the worshippers just winning a combat. Not only this, but wyverns were also known for being ferocious, and while not cowardly, they were rather precise in when they chose to attack creatures, which could make it seem that they were actually cowardly, but in reality they just went after weak creatures because it was easier, and their whole goal is just to get food, so. The only other god I could reference in regard to wyvern would be Tiamat, and that's probably a name most of you know. The lesser dragon god Tiamat was established in 3.5's the race of dragon to have a long tail tip with a venomous stinger similar to that of a wyvern. Now, this would probably be the most respect a lot of books gave the wyvern, as historically throughout multiple sources, books I went through often like to describe wyverns as just stupid. And I can't remember exactly which one, but the word stupid is used 4 times in the book, and 2 of the 4 uses are for wyvern. Poor wyvern. Now, that's really all we have in regards to wyvern with deities or much of their evolution or beginning, but we can look at maybe some of the diversity of the cast of variant wyverns. So I can't say there's really a diverse cast of variant wyverns. I don't want to go into extended explanation as to how one might say a variant wyvern is a dragon or a landworm, because really that might just hurt the ego of the dragons out there, heaven forbid. 4th edition saw the creation of the Fell Wyvern, a Shadowfell influenced wyvern whose venom had a necrotic effect in addition to its poison damage, and it could issue forth a pestilence breath that did ongoing damage. And while I want to express more about this wyvern, there isn't actually a whole lot of information on it, other than drawing its connection to the Shadowfell, but dwelling on the material plane. Which is a little unfortunate because it was actually a really cool entry in 4th edition, which brought about some very interesting takes on some monsters, if we remember Lamia, but I'll digress. So, what of the wyvern now? Where does it sit in its lore? I can assure you the wyvern has an unfortunate history of belittlement and a long cast shadow by its draconic cousins. I have previously used this time to compare and read through the 2024 5th edition monster description for creatures, and I want to do that again, but just before I begin, this section largely focuses on the conceptual idea that the monster manual is referencing lore important to the Forgotten Realms, but this edition of D&D has made no claims to all the creatures' descriptions being lore accurate to the Forgotten Realms, but I'm giving my thoughts as if this is the understanding, because we need to be able to draw some new conclusions for the lore to always expand upon it. That note aside, let's begin. Opportunistic predators. Wyverns are draconic ambushers that strike from above. These territorial hunters attack with their fangs and stinger-tipped tails. Wyvern stingers drip the deadly venom, a painful toxin feared by monsters, hunters, and coveted by alchemists. Wyverns are aggressive and claim sizable territories around mountains, crags, and ruins where they dwell. Despite their considerable strength, they're opportunistic hunters that target unwitting livestock and groups of encamped travelers. Wyverns usually land only to finish off creatures they've weakened with their poison and strafing attacks. Creatures that fight back or take flight might deter wyverns, convincing them to search for easier prey. Once wyverns overpower a quarry, they carry it to their cavernous lairs to either consume it in safety or trap it to eat later. Most wyverns don't hoard treasure, but their lairs are littered with the possessions of past victims. It is uncommon for wyverns to carry off chests, carts, or small boats along with their prey. For starters, I want to say the art is a star showcase for the wyvern in the realms. We established they were Dusker Dawn hunters. The coloring of the art actually matches several of our depictions. It is all around an enticing and fun depiction, truly honors the wyvern. After the description, I can say I'm rather pleased with how wyverns are described. They have always fit the bill of being an opportunistic hunter, even without directly saying it, and I really thought the concept of potentially snagging chests or cart is a fun detail to include. While this does completely change the design of the wyvern, I think the description does much better than a lot of previous editions by describing the creature as more intellectual rather than stupid. They may be overlooked when compared to dragons, but these regal creatures have finally earned themselves a spot among dragons with their depiction here. Across Faerun, not every legend carries gold, wisdom, or ancient curses. Some simply fall from the sky, bite through bone, and vanish before the screen ends. The wyvern is more than a dragon. It is a reminder that power does not always need to think, that the skies are not always silent, and that death can have wings without words. So when the wind shifts and the birds go quiet, fear the skies. I'm the local game master, and thank you for listening to this deep dive into wyverns. If you enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe. For more content on D&D, thank you.